In Bible times, the fastest means of travel was on the back of a camel or a donkey. The Bible forecast the time when there would be much and rapid travel, enabling the people to travel worldwide in a matter of hours. Here we are in Mexico, a country that is moving by leaps and bounds into the 20th century way of life. Another country halfway around the world, and the people here as elsewhere are on the move. Thousands of miles away in India, the ancient and the modern blend in a bizarre mosaic to remind us that out of the old emerges the new. Out of history come prophecies fulfilled. Again, thousands of miles away, behind the Iron Curtain, lies Russia. Here is a difference of language, a difference of politics, but the problems of rapid travel remain the same. And now in Scandinavia, the problem of rapid travel takes on charm. Bicycles compete with motored vehicles, all trying to get someplace as fast as possible. In another country, even the reindeer are in the competition. In Germany, the famous Autobahn provides the arteries for speed. Wherever you are, the people are on the go.
Hello, friends. Sometimes we hear people speak of the end of time, but the Bible reverses this and tells us about the time of the end. What is the time of the end? And how do we know that it doesn't mean the end of time? These are among the points to be discussed in this documented program. With me, as you see, is Mr. Norman Woodworth, Associate Editor of the Dawn Magazine, and Mr. Edward Fay, and together we will examine some of the prophecies pertaining to the time of the end.
And friends, meet our moderator, Mr. Russell Pollock.
Thank you. Ed, can you tell us where in the Bible the expression, the time of the end, is found?
That expression is found in the 4th verse of the 12th chapter of Daniel. I'll read it for you. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. This is part of a prophecy which the Lord gives us through the prophet Daniel, a prophecy which was not to be understood until the time of the end.
Well, first of all, it seems to me that we should examine that expression, the time of the end. Just what does it mean? Norman, your comment, please.
Briefly, we could say that the time of the end is a transition period which will terminate in the full establishment of the kingdom of Christ.
And that, of course, will eventually mean the end of all evil, including sickness and death. Paul wrote that Christ must reign until all enemies are subdued, and that the last enemy to be destroyed is death.
Surely that is a hopeful outlook. I know that many people hesitate to study the prophecies of the Bible, supposing that they point out some sort of doomsday that will come upon the earth. However, from what you say, that's not so. But do we have any way of knowing when the time of the end is here?
The text read by Ed calls attention to some of the characteristics of the time of the end. One of them is that there would be a great increase of knowledge. I think there's every reason to believe that it has been given to this generation to witness this foretold increase of knowledge.
Recently, I came across a good illustration of this. If the last 6,000 years of man's educational progress were represented in a book with one page devoted to each year, it would not be until approximately 5,800 pages were written that the common man could be described as achieving the status of literacy. The great educational institutions of today highlight the fact of the world's increasing knowledge in this time of the end.
That is very interesting. It is hard to realize that the education of the masses is such a modern attainment.
But Russell, it surely is. In India, 88% of the people were still illiterate in 1949. In China, 70% were still illiterate in 1949. In Mexico and Brazil, over 50% were illiterate as late as 1947. In Russia, 90% were still illiterate in 1900. The United States is one of the foremost countries of the world, yet here, as late as 90 years ago, 20% of the population 14 years of age or older could not read or write. Compulsory education of the masses is a comparatively modern thing.
General education was not possible until after the development of printing, and the art of printing was unknown prior to the 15th century, and it was centuries after that before the impact of printing was felt to any considerable extent by the world.
I understand that the Bible was one of the first books to be printed. I am right in this, am I not?
I believe so, Russell. And it was early in the 19th century that most of our great Bible societies were formed. And now the Bible is the world's bestseller and has been translated into more than 1,200 languages and dialects. Unfortunately, however, it would seem that while today the Bible is enjoying a tremendous circulation, it's the least understood book in the world.
That, I believe, is true. But what about our present methods of communication? Are they also of recent origin?
Yes, Russell. Even more so than the art of printing. The telegraph has quickened our life. The telephone has speeded our communication problem, and miles of wires have tied us together electronically. Man can now create lightning. Lightning is used in the Bible as a symbol of the spread of knowledge. God's lightnings enlighten the world, wrote the prophet David. One of the vivid illustrations of the increase of knowledge is in our modern methods of farming. Here we see farming being done the hard way, and there was no better way of doing this until the time of the end in which we are living. No farmer 100 years ago could imagine harvesting his grain in this manner, and yet these modern methods of harvesting are now in general use, not only throughout the United States and Canada, but many other parts of the earth as well, proving again that we are living in the time of the end foretold by the Bible. Who would think of washing clothes this way today? Instead, we just load them into a nice automatic washer, press a button, and wait for the job to be done.
You know, it is most impressive to be reminded of the truly remarkable times in which we are living. But how can we be sure that this outstanding and sudden increase of knowledge is not attributable to man's own efforts, rather than to the outworking of God's plan of the ages?
Man does, of course, take credit for it. We're told that we're living in the brain age. But this is not true. The human brain capacity is no greater today than thousands of years ago when the fastest means of travel was on the back of a donkey or a camel. The great philosophers, sculptors, artists, and musicians of the past prove this. Actually, there are very few people today, comparatively, who are scientists and inventors. It is just that through the great increase of knowledge foretold in the Bible, the benefits of science and invention have become available to the masses. As I said, man does take the credit for what is taking place in the world today. This is symbolized by the many instances in which we see a man holding up the world. We have one of these at the World's Fair. And there's still another at Rockefeller Plaza in New York City.
You know, the thought has just occurred to me that perhaps man is not doing such a good job of holding up his world. We know that right now, the very existence of civilization is being threatened.
And Russell, this situation has also been brought about by the increase of knowledge in this time of the end of the reign of sin and death. Knowledge is reaching out to the backward nations of the earth, summoning them to start the great march for liberty and for economic security. At the same time, the increase of knowledge has provided more deadly weapons of war, so deadly, in fact, that now man has it within his power to destroy the human race itself. Daniel spoke of this aspect of the time of the end, saying that there would be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. Jesus quoted Daniel's prophecy and applied it to the time of his second presence when he returned to establish his long-promised kingdom on the earth.
And that's what makes the great increase of knowledge in our day so important in our understanding of the divine plan for giving health and life to the people. However, knowledge in itself is not evil, and indeed, even now, is producing many worthwhile benefits for mankind.
Yes, we are all happy to acknowledge that many people in the world are genuinely interested in doing what they can to help others.
And that, Russell, is because man was originally created in the image of God. While man has fallen from the original perfection of his creation, much of his goodness remains. And if it were not for selfishness, which so often overreaches human efforts, the world would be a much better place in which to live. But we're happy to be assured that through the agencies of Christ's kingdom, man will learn the advantages of love over selfishness. That's when the prophetic increase of knowledge will cause an appreciation of the Lord to fill the earth as the waters cover the sea.
And if we are now actually living in a transition period leading into that kingdom, this time of the end is certainly a momentous period in which to be living. Now, as I remember the text you read concerning the time of the end, it also said that it would be a time when there would be much running to and fro. What does that mean?
That would seem to have reference to the fact that as a result of the great increase of knowledge of our time, there would come much and rapid travel, and this also is a remarkable feature of our day. It was on the basis of this prophecy that the noted English scientist and Bible scholar Sir Isaac Newton predicted that a time would come when man would travel as fast as 50 miles an hour. Newton's predictions were considered so incredible that he was ridiculed by his 18th century contemporaries. Today, however, less than 300 years later, international jet travel, complex highway systems, superpowered automobiles, and streamlined trains have become commonplace.
Some of us, of course, can remember the horse and buggy days, but it must be difficult for young people today to realize that all our wonderful and rapid means of travel have not always existed.
That is true. But when we think of what has taken place in the last 2 centuries, it helps us to realize the accuracy of the Bible prophecies. Another prophecy concerning this is in Nahum chapter 2, and that's verse 3 and 4. This could very well be a reference to automobiles. I'd like to read the prophecy. The chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of his preparation.
I suppose that the prophet, seeing automobiles in his vision, would just naturally call them chariots.
Right. And he says that the chariots shall rage in the streets, and they shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. They shall run like the lightning. This, I think, is a good description of automobile traffic today.
Ed, I noticed that the prophecy you just read said that these things would take place in the day of God's preparation. What is the day of God's preparation?
It is the time when God is preparing for the long-promised kingdom of Christ. The word used in the Hebrew text means to establish. It is the same word as used by the prophet Micah when he said that in the last days the kingdom of the Lord would be established and that the peoples and nations would flow into it. It is in this kingdom that the nations will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks and learn war no more.
Well, it seems to me that at least some of the nations of earth are already beginning to learn the futility of war as a means of settling international disputes.
That is no doubt true in a preparatory sense, but not until Christ's kingdom is fully established and the people learn the Lord's ways will lasting peace actually be established. And that will not be a peace maintained by the threat of nuclear war.
And getting back to Daniel's prophecy of much and rapid travel, think of how modern means of travel have brought the far-flung countries of the earth together. Today one can fly around the world over a weekend. If they want to do some sightseeing, it takes a bit longer.
And here, in the best of comfort, we go for a brief visit to some of the principal places one can see on a trip around the world. Here we are in London. First, the Parliament buildings. Did you know that as late as the beginning of the 19th century, many members of the House of Lords could not sign their own names? In London, as in every city in the world, there isn't a street or a highway or an alleyway where we are not reminded of the world running to and fro. St. Paul's Cathedral, where architecture holds on to the past. Even with relaxation, we are preoccupied with travel. Changing the guard at Buckingham Palace. This is a page out of the past, brought over into modern times. That royalty had to thus be guarded reminds us that civilization has always needed the power of arms to maintain its institutions. How wonderful it will be when, according to the promises of God, the nations will not need to learn war anymore. Oops, here we are, off in comfort to Paris. Can't see everything, you know, even in this day of rapid travel. Some say that Paris begins with the Seine. It's the place where many Parisians go to first, to be alone. The street markets and sidewalk cafes are also a part of Paris. Our next stop is Rome. To Christians, Rome is one of the most interesting cities of the old world. It is a curious blending of the ancient and the modern. The Apostle Paul visited Rome, traveling there from the seacoast on the Appian Way, which is still one of the landmarks of Rome. Here is the ancient Colosseum in Rome, where Christians were thrown to the lions to amuse the emperor and his friends. They speak of the glory of Rome, but there is much that is inglorious associated with the history of this city. The Apostle Paul didn't see anything like this when he visited Rome. Well, it didn't take long to get from Rome to Hong Kong with its beautiful harbor. Not all transportation in Hong Kong is modern. Imagine enjoying scenery like this while taking a cable car ride. Hong Kong is modern and Hong Kong is old, but Hong Kong lives under a shadow, a red shadow, where a brave, creative people live with hope and at the same time with fear. They are moving as the 20th century moves, faster and faster with increase of knowledge. Everywhere, east and west, the same movement is caught in a kind of speed machine moving forward and fast. To where? We all ask where, and only prophecy tells us where and why. Here we jet with ease to Tokyo. Here again is the same story of people in a tide of movement. In some sections of Tokyo, one might almost think he was in a western city. Tokyo is a city that loves beauty and gives its heart to it. Japan is one of those fascinating countries in which the heritage of the past is apparent because we can see it from village to village as we travel backward and forward in time. One can see how mankind is moving and how this movement reinforces the validity of biblical prophecy. It is no longer speculation. It is as apparent to the mind as it is visible to the eye. When we read of ancient things as recorded in books, we sometimes lack the power of belief. They seem to have happened in some imaginary place. But a country like Japan reminds us how deeply the future and the present are rooted in the past. And now in jet comfort and jet speed over the broad expanse of the Pacific to Hawaii. Could this be ringing the dinner bell? It would seem so. For here is not the fatted calf, but the roasted pig, and we are just in time for dinner. My, that is good. And now for a walk along the beach. a bit of surfboarding in the moonlight, and we are off to the last stop. Yes, here we are over New York, being brought into the city from the airport by helicopter. Those tall buildings don't seem so tall and imposing from away up here, and you would hardly know that there are so many people on the streets. How small we humans are, really. Yet man was created in the image of God and commanded by God to subdue the earth. Well, some of the forces of nature are now being subdued in this time of the end, this day of preparation for Christ's kingdom. Our little tour is over. We have seen more of the earth in detail than astronauts do. And everywhere there is the sense that human destiny is moving into the sunset. But the prophecies of the Bible assure us that in reality, mankind is moving into the dawn of a new and better day.
Truly we are living in a wonderful time, which, as you say, the Bible calls the time of the end of sin and death, and the day of preparation for Christ's kingdom.
Actually, Russell, in another sense, the death and resurrection of Jesus was in preparation for his kingdom. It was necessary for Jesus to die in order that the world of mankind might be released from death. Since that time, God has been selecting a people from the earth to live and reign with Christ in his kingdom. But now the preparatory work is about completed, and we can rejoice in the hope of the near establishment of that kingdom.
Yes, that should be cause for rejoicing, despite the fact that the world is now filled with fear. Just what is the kingdom of Christ? How will it function? What are some of the evidences that it is near at hand? What are some of the blessings which mankind will receive through that long-promised kingdom? Do you know that eventually sickness and death will be destroyed, and that those who sleep in death will be awakened? These are some of the important truths you will find set forth in the little book, The Kingdom of God.
To view the booklet online, visit www.dawnbible.com, or to receive a hard copy of the booklet by mail, send us your name and postal mailing address and ask for the booklet by name. The title of the booklet for this program is The Kingdom of God. Send an email to dawnbible@aol.com. The booklet will be mailed to you free and without obligation. And now, goodbye, and may God bless you.